Hey everybody, I'm Chrysantheme and welcome to my Might and Magic 6 The Mandate of Heaven playthrough. Now, I'm a big fan of the Might and Magic franchise, and I think that Might and Magic 6, 7 and 8 are probably the best Western RPGs made so far. And I wanted to do a playthrough because I feel like that the younger generation of gamers either do not know the games in franchise, or they don't want to try it because, you know, the graphics are bad or the game mechanics are either complicated or too old to try. They think like it's not worth trying. But honestly, if you get the basic mechanics down, you'll find that the game is actually really deep and really fun to play. So I'm doing this as a sort of tutorial playthrough. I'm going to try to teach you the basic mechanics of the game in hopes that you'll actually, you know, pick it up and play it for yourself, because I do think that it's worth trying out. And, you know, especially if you're an RPG fan. So I'm going to dedicate this first episode to party creation. There's a lot of things that we will go over, but if you're not interested in that, I guess you could skip straight ahead to episode 2, where we will be starting the actual gameplay. And that's pretty much it, so without further ado, let's start a new game.
Having cheated death during the night of shooting stars, you find yourself as far from your village of Sweetwater as old Falagar's magic could take you. 3 years have passed while Falagar imparted what knowledge he could to train you in your chosen professions. But the time came at last when he could teach you no more, and you have ventured into the world to seek your fame and fortune. Now, a world away from your lost home, you have stumbled across evidence of a terrible conspiracy involving a new religious cult. 5 letters from King Roland to his wife Catherine, and a letter from the King of the Devils to a wicked traitor named Sulman have turned up in an abandoned goblin camp. Your fate seems inextricably bound to these letters and that awful night, and your role in the events to come may be larger than anyone could imagine. The tools you have are but a small sum of gold, your wits, and a lot of potential. The roads ahead are infinite, and all the choices are yours to make. So choose wisely. Good luck.
So this is kind of the whole plot of the game. I won't go into the plot too much because I feel like if you're interested in the story, you should experience it yourself. But the gist of it is basically the devils are attacking your planet, your sort of quote-unquote home, and you have to stop them, which is pretty simple as far as things go, although the plot itself is kind of, you know, it is deep, but at the same time it's kind of silly. You'll know what I mean once we get into the actual game, and you know, when you'll be playing it yourself and reading the text, you'll see that it is kind of humorous in a way. Now you have 2 buttons below the screen. You have the quick start option or the create party option. Now if you click quick start, you will have a default party made out of a paladin, an archer, a cleric and a sorcerer, which is actually a very good party to start the game out with if you're a beginner. But there are a lot of things that you can optimize even in that party. So we're gonna go ahead and click on the create party button, and this is the create party menu. So you'll see a lot of things. You have the character portraits that you can change. You can change the name, you can change the classes, the stats, the skills, a lot of things. So let's go through them one by one. First things first, let's have a look at the classes, because that's probably the most important thing you have here. Let's start with the knight. So the knight is basically your run-of-the-mill burly physical guy. He can learn all weapon skills and all armor skills, but he has no magic, which is very important in this game, especially because magic is much stronger in this game than might is, so to say. But basically, if I right click here, you can read the flavor text that comes with it. I'm not going to read it to you because I feel like that would be just a colossal waste of time. But the gist of the knight is basically you have all weapon skills or armor skills, the miscellaneous skills, but you have no magic skills. You do get a very high amount of hit points though, which is good if you're in a bind, because you can use the knight to run away with your party basically. But I won't be choosing a knight for this playthrough just because I prefer other classes that have magic. So the next sort of pure class is the cleric. The cleric is actually a pretty good, physical class as well. You can learn maces with them, which are pretty decent in this game, and you also have access to the chainmail, which is sort of like the tier 2 armor out of 3 tiers. The first tier is leather armor, the second tier is chain armor, and the heaviest tier 3 armor is the plate armor. And only the knight and paladin can actually learn the plate armor. And the cleric is basically the only pure caster that can have a chainmail armor, which is very, very good. Anyway, the cleric specializes in basically healing and buffing magic. Specifically, he can learn the spirit, the mind, and the body schools of magic, which are incredibly useful in your playthrough. So we're going to have at least one cleric. The next pure class is the sorcerer, which is sort of similar to the cleric. It is a magic-focused class, but it has the elemental magic trees. It has fire, earth, water, and air magic. And these are basically the more damage-dealing oriented magic schools. So having a sorcerer in your party, I think, is crucial, because without him, you're just going to be dealing 0 damage. So the next we have 3 hybrid classes. The paladin is a hybrid class between the knight and the cleric. The archer class is a hybrid between the knight and the sorcerer, and the druid is a hybrid class between the cleric and the sorcerer. Now, the reason why I like taking the hybrid classes is because they sort of do a lot of things. They do, however, have a pretty slow growth, and the strongest things are unavailable to them. You'll see what I mean once we get into this game, once we get somewhere into this game. But basically, the paladin class has access to all weapons, all armor, all miscellaneous skills, which are, like disarm, trap, and repair item, and things like that. But he also has access to spirit, mind, and body magic, which the knight, for example, does not have. So he's useful as sort of a tankier frontline melee damage dealer, but is also useful as a backup healer in case your cleric, bites the dust. Next we have the archer, which is, as I said, a mixture of knight and sorcerer classes. He has the option of having a lot of weapon skills. He can wear chain armor, and he also has access to the basic elemental magics, which is air, fire, water, and earth. Like I said, as with the paladin, he's useful as a non-magic based damage dealer, but has a backup of being able to cast spells. And then we have the druid, which is basically a mix between the cleric and the sorcerer class. In terms of fighting, he's pretty much the worst fighter next to the sorcerer, but he has access to both, the elemental spells and the self spells, which are, so he has access to fire, air, water, earth spells, and he has access to body, mind, and spirit magic. He can be useful, but I feel like the lack of orientation can hurt him in the long run if you try to, develop both the self magics and the elemental magics. You'll have to dump, a lot of skill points into them. I think that I never actually picked up a single druid in my Might and Magic 6 playthrough. But anyway, I'm going to make my party out of a paladin, an archer, a cleric, and a sorcerer, because I feel that this party will give you a good mix of, weapon skills, armor skills, magic skills, and everything. For this playthrough, I'm also not going to have any duplicate classes, purely because I think it's more fun that way. Although you certainly can have, more than one sorcerer, for example, or more than one cleric. In my opinion, the strongest party is actually one cleric and 3 sorcerers, purely because magic is much stronger in this game than, Might and Magic 7 or 8, for example. But this party will give you a nice mix of everything. I'm going to stick with the same names, so I'm going to name this paladin Roderick. I don't know, it's probably nostalgic reasons, and I'm very used to having the same names on the characters. I even named Might and Magic 7 characters after these characters because, you know, I kind of like them. So, next thing we have are the stats. Stats are pretty simple. I'll right click so you can read the flavor text if you want. Just pause it. I'm not going to be reading all of it. I'm just going to give you the gist of it. So basically, let's start with might. Might is basically, the higher your might is, the more damage you'll deal in hand-to-hand combat using melee weapons. Intellect gives more spell points, which is basically mana used for casting spells. Intellect will give you more spell points if you are an archer, if you are a sorcerer, or if you are a druid. Now, having higher intellect will give more spell points to a sorcerer compared to an archer. Now, personality is basically similar to intellect, but if you have higher personality, you'll have more spell points if you are a cleric, if you're a paladin, or if you're a druid. Now, if you'll remember, the druid also has more spell points if they have more intellect. So druids usually end up with, you know, a very large amount of spell points, purely because, you know, they derive their spell points from both the intellect and the personality stats. Next is endurance, which is pretty simple. You get more HP. The knight gets the most HP out of endurance, but that doesn't mean that it's only important for the knight. It's very important for your sorcerer as well, even though he will get less hit points from it. Accuracy is basically once you make an attack, does the attack actually land, you know, to do damage? Speed is how fast you recover from an action. Basically, how often can you attack or cast spells? And luck is sort of an ambiguous stat. Luck basically affects a lot of things. It affects your might a bit, your intellect a bit, your personality a bit, etc. It also affects things like avoiding as much trap damage as possible. But in my opinion, it is the worst stat and the least important stat to have. So, now we have a pool of bonus points that we'll have to allocate, but first thing we're going to do is we're going to take as much points from luck as possible, and we are going to deduce points from the stat that does not bring any value to a certain class. For example, intellect will not give spell points to paladins, so we're going to take that off, and personality doesn't give spell points to an archer, so we're going to take that off as well. Same with the cleric, intellect off, same with the sorcerer, personality off. Now, next thing, I like to max out the intellect on the sorcerer and the personality on the cleric because I want them to have as much spell points as possible. Then I sort of like to, you know, even the stats out a bit. So I'm going to give 4 points in speed for the cleric and 4 points in speed in accuracy, pardon me, for the sorcerer, and I'm going to give 4 points each in might, so they will be at least, you know, semi-useful in a melee confrontation. I'm also going to give 2 points in might for the archer. So next is maxing out the might for the paladin, because I want them to do as much damage as possible, and I'm also going to give 2 points in speed. Let's put a few points, let's say 6 points, into personality and intellect of the archer and the paladin, and we're going to use the one remaining point to put into the might of the archer, which is sort of like our second best melee champion or hero or whatever you want to call it, so I want them to be dealing a fair amount of damage as well. So next up we have skills. Now skills are extremely important. Now if you'll pay attention to my playthrough, I will be choosing skills that I find are optimal to take. There will be a few exceptions though, but let's go and just, you know, have a gander at the skills. You have 4 different types of skills. You have weapon skills, you have armor skills, you have magic skills, and you have miscellaneous skills. Basically, weapon skills are, for example, sword, axe, bow, spear, and stuff like that. Armor skills are shield, leather, chainmail or chain, and plate mail or plate. the magic skills, as I've said, are spirit, mind, body, and then we had the elemental skills of fire, air, water, earth, and then there are two more magic skills which only the cleric and the sorcerer can learn, and those are the most powerful magic skills there are. They're called the if I remember correctly, I think they're called the path of the mirrored magic or something like that. Can't remember now. They're basically the dark and light magic, which sound awesome. They are awesome, and they're totally worth it once you get them. They do consume your spell points like nothing else though, so it's sort of a late game magic type. But anyway, the point of the skills is you cannot equip weapons or armor, and you cannot learn or use spells if you do not have the appropriate skill. For example, right now I have two fixed skills in all of my characters. My paladin has a sword skill and a spirit magic skill. Because I have a sword skill, I will be able to equip swords, but I will not be able to equip, for example, daggers or spears or maces. If I wanted to, for example, equip a spear, I'm going to have to put a spear skill here. One more thing to note here is that your skills have skill levels. For example, you have a level 1 sword skill, level 2 sword skill, level 3 sword skill, etc. They basically scale up to, I think it's 36, if I remember correctly, but you're never going to get so far because of the way that you have to give, because of the way you have to level up these skills. And skills also have skill masteries. That's what I like to call them. If I right click, you'll see that below the description there are three sort of paragraphs. You have normal, which means skill added to attack bonus. You have expert, which means skill added to skill reduces recovery time, and master, which permits use of sword and left hand. This is going to be extremely important because you want your skills to be useful. And while, for example, some skills aren't very useful on normal levels, they can be extremely useful at master levels. Now, in Might Magic 6, if your character can learn a skill, they can also master it. There are no restrictions. But those are the basics. As we go along the game, I'll try to explain more things. I'm going to give you my opinions on which things to level first, which to take. But for now, we're going to take a spear from our paladin. And we're going to take what are we going to take? We're going to take Disarm Trap with him. And as you can see, we have two weapon skills. We have two melee weapon skills, which might be a little weird. But if you remember, when I hovered over the sword, the master sword skill permits us to use our sword in left hand, which is incredibly important because I want them to be dealing as much damage as possible in melee, like the paladin and the archer, so I won't be using shields on them. But you'll see in the future if you'll pay attention to the series. Now, the archer always starts with the bow skill, which is a crucial skill as well, and air magic, and we're going to give her the sword. And now I can't decide if I want the axe for variety, or should I just go with the spear later. You know what, I'm actually going to give her the axe this time. It's not optimal, but it's almost as good as the spear, in my opinion. Now, the cleric starts with mace and body magic, and the paladin starts with spirit magic, so the only magic that's missing, in the self tree of magic, is the mind magic. So I'm going to put mind magic on her, and I'm also going to give her a shield because she cannot wield swords, so her offhand is basically shield or nothing, in which case shield is obviously better. And then we have the sorcerer. The archer already has air magic, so I'm going to put water magic on him because it's more important than earth magic, and we're going to give him leather because that's the only armor that he can wear, and I want him to be at least basically armored. So this is my recommendation for a party. You can experiment all you want with them. You know, it's an RPG. Do what you think fits you best. This is my personal recommendation if you're starting out playing this game. But there are absolutely better better party setups. Like I said, probably the strongest party is a cleric and 3 sorcerers, although that is very difficult to play in the beginning. And it sort of abuses some game mechanics, which I find cheesy and don't want to do for the first playthrough. But this is basically our party. So let's go ahead and move on to episode 2, which is actually starting the damn game. See you in episode 2, guys.